You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode number 81 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. And now that my voice has finally returned and I'm starting to feel better after being sick for the past few weeks with a respiratory virus, I am thrilled to be recording new episodes of the podcast. This week, I am happy to be sharing the first in a series of tradition studies. At the end of this episode, I'll be getting to some listener email and reviews, as well as sharing some recovery music submitted by a listener and program friend. So back in December, recurring guest of the podcast, Darren F, sent me an email asking if I thought doing a tradition study would be a good topic for the podcast. I've done readings on the podcast before about the traditions, but never a full episode and let alone a series. The guest panel that we had came from Darren's home group in Texas, and they used quite a few readings from various literature, mainly the Big Book of AA, the 12 and 12, and that's 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, as well as the SAA Green Book. Many of the AA readings were adapted by the various readers to fit SAA and sex addiction versus AA and alcoholism. And although we had a lot of literature quoted in the recording, I also wanted to select a reading here at the beginning of this episode from the Green Book, and this comes from Chapter 5, Our Purpose, under the section on service, and this is the last paragraph on page 76. At every level of our service structure, we are guided by the 12 traditions of SAA, as adapted from the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just as the steps teach us the spiritual principles necessary for healthy individual recovery, the traditions embody the spiritual principles necessary for the healthy functioning of our groups. Adhering to these principles safeguards our fellowship, thus protecting the recovery of each individual member. We have found that they also help us to act with integrity in our personal relationships and as responsible members of society. So I thought that was a perfect lead-in to our discussion. And now I'm ready to turn it over to this week's recording. Please enjoy. All right, welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the traditions. Darren, who has been on the podcast before, we talked about the 12 concepts on an episode, and we also talked about the PICPC Committee, Public Information and Cooperation with the Professional Community. And Darren reached out and wanted to know if I wanted to do some recordings around the traditions. And so we're going to be doing a tradition study. And over the next, I'm not sure how long it will take, but we'll do a number of sessions. And just like some of the episodes that we've done in the past, we've done some actual first step presentations in the past, talking about step 1. With step 4, I've broken some Joe and Charlie recordings into 4 different episodes. We also had a group collaboration talking about step 9 and the 9th step promises. And so this one, I imagine breaking the 12 traditions up into multiple recordings and spacing those out over the next couple of months. And so tonight we're hoping to tackle, I think, traditions 1 through 3. And so I am going to be turning this over to Darren here in a second, and we'll give a chance for everyone else that is here on this episode to introduce themselves. Let us know how long you've been in the program, what your inner circles may be, whatever you feel comfortable with, just to get a brief glimpse on who you are, and then we'll start in with the traditions. So I'm going to turn it over to Darren.
Thanks, Jason. Darren F, recovered sex addict. So great to be here with you tonight, and some of my closest friends here in the fellowship. Just a quick introduction for me. I've been in Sex Addicts Anonymous since November of 2010. And sober for 9 years now, since November of 12. And my home group's the Taking Action group in McKinney, Texas. And I'll let Todd introduce himself.
Hey, thanks, Darren. Todd G, recovered sex addict. Really glad to be here and support the tradition discussion tonight. I came to my first meeting in July of 2019 and joined the Taking Action group in August of that year. And my sobriety date currently is October 24, 2022. And just really glad to be here. Thank you.
Eric M.
Hello, my name is Eric M. Glad to be here as well. Glad this is a podcast. I've been told I have a face for radio. So I joined Taking Action Group McKinney June 5th of 2017. Recovery has been a stock ticker, and I'm glad that I keep coming back.
Great. Jim S.
Hey, thanks, Darren. My name's Jim, and I'm a sex addict. I found SAA in September of 2015. Found TAG, Taking Action Group, as my home group, and I found that in November of 2015. My sobriety date's 12/9/2015. I have a sponsor, a grand sponsor, that both belong to my home group, and have the privilege of working with several different guys. I'll pass.
Thanks. Now we've got Bob D.
Hi, Bob D, a recovering addict. I came to SAA in the October of 2018, went to a group which wasn't action-based. I know it works for some people, but it was more talking-based. Anyway, so 40 years of acting out, and I couldn't stop it. And it finally took me coming to TAG McKinney in January 3 years ago, when I decided I couldn't do it, and I got serious about working the steps. So I gave up step one. So my sobriety date is January the 25th, 2020. And I'm very pleased to be here, Jason.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Scott R, I see you joined us here at the end. We're just doing a brief introduction, how long you've been in SAA, where you're from, home group kind of thing, sobriety date.
Gotcha. This is Scott R. I'm from McKinney, the McKinney area. My home group is McKinney TAG, Taking Action Group. And my sobriety date is February 21st, 2020. I've been involved with SAA since October of 2015.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. And again, I'm going to be turning it over to Darren to lead the discussion.
Super. It's great to have you all with me tonight here to talk about our second legacy, our legacy of unity, the 12 traditions. You know, one of the things I've experienced when I've explored our fellowship over the last 12 years is that the traditions, and especially the concepts, our third legacy of service, really gets overlooked. You know, we're also familiar with our traditions, our steps, and then in a meeting we might read a tradition of the month, read it, and move on to the topic du jour. You know, what I found is that these traditions are so important to the unity of our fellowship, the survival of our fellowship, and you know, my lineage of sponsorship was such that as soon as we were done with the 12 steps, which, you know, for me happened pretty quick, you know, kind of 90 days through the majority of the work, we continued to meet and over a period of about 4 sessions. So kind of similar to what we might be doing on the podcast, about 4 sessions, 3 traditions each session, kind of formally reviewed the traditions. And so that's my hope with this, is to kind of show you what I experienced with learning about the traditions and teaching the traditions. And the folks that are on the call are all a part of that type of lineage, where it's the sponsor's job to teach the remainder of the other 24 principles, right? 12 traditions, 12 concepts. And we certainly have a lot of work to do with the 12 concepts in terms of teaching that to the folks that we sponsor. So that's kind of the idea here, is this is one way to teach about the traditions to the folks that we sponsor. It's not the only way. It's not necessarily the best way. It's just an example of kind of in an informal way, in a casual way, we can inform the people that are coming to us for help to learn more about our fellowship, the program, and our three legacies of recovery, unity, and service. Just wanted to hit a couple things. Some of the resources that we're going to use as we're doing the podcast are the short form of the traditions, long form of the traditions. That that long form word comes from AA, and we'll dissect that a little bit. We're going to look at the traditions portions of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. And there's other resources that, we always recommend folks review to educate themselves on the traditions, like the AA pamphlet, 12 Traditions Illustrated, books like AA Comes of Age, Pass It On. Obviously, the Green Book, it's got essays on the traditions. And so we're going to be hitting the highlights from those books, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. A couple of things just on the history and the timeline. Anyone know when the traditions first came about in Alcoholics Anonymous, roughly?
I want to say 5 to 7 years after the steps. So in the late 30s or early 40s.
I'm looking at a cheat sheet and it tells me 1950.
Nice.
Right, Eric. Yeah, you're looking at the cheat sheet. I get it. They were formally adopted in 1950, but the primary author of the AA Big Book, right, in the 12 and 12, Bill W. He a big visionary, right? And he started to see a need for some of these traditions to help unify the fellowship, and he started writing articles, and he put them in the AA Grapevine, which is their version of our Outer Circle, 1946, more or less, and I love what he titled them. He called them an Alcoholics Anonymous Tradition of Relations, 12 Points to Ensure Our Future. I love that, the 12 points to ensure our future. How great would it be in SAA to go, all right, now Jason's going to read the fourth tradition that's going to ensure our future. It gives it a lot more weight, because it really is about ensuring SAA's future. And so, 1950, they were formally adopted by the AA Fellowship. And then 1953, they put some essays together, which we'll dissect here over the course of the next hour in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. And then in 1955, I think they finally made it into the big book. And in 1977, of course, Sex Addicts Anonymous was founded. And our Green Book, of course, in 2005, page 77 to 96, discusses. And the term long form isn't real common in terms of SAA speak. The longer form contains some additional language, some additional words that we'll look at, but AA didn't really surrender the copyright for those. And so no other 12-step fellowship formally publishes the long form, but there's some great insights into that. And so SAA just uses an adapted version of the shorter form of the traditions. And there are a couple little changes, primarily in tradition 2 and 3, which we'll talk about as we go through it. Let's see, what else? What else is jumping out at you guys in terms of just the history and where we're going with this?
I love the question, Darren. Todd G. I'm just grateful that, we talk about the traditions plainly, and whether you're a new guy that's walking in the room for the first time or you've been there for 6 or 9 years, I think it's important for people to consider that they've got a place to go. And one of the reasons, if not the reason they have a place to go, is because these 12 traditions, we say frequently, is what keeps the group healthy. It's what keeps the group sober. And if there wasn't a group, we would not have service opportunities. So I just really appreciate how well the traditions are woven through the book. And I'm grateful that, we speak to them and share them and discuss them. And, that's true for longstanding members and new guys coming into the fellowship for the first time. So pass.
Eric, recovered sex addict. I really like that the traditions were kind of born out of failure. and a need to course correct, because I think all addicts can identify with failure and the need to course correct. And they didn't change the program at its core, but they allowed all of the quote unquote distractions to be isolated so that we could focus on the primary purpose. And I'm really, really glad that they had to go through this to make the program what it is today.
Hey guys, Bob D, recovering addict. Honestly, when I first came into Take an Action Group and we used to read these every week, I was like, oh, it didn't mean a thing to me. I'm dying, help me. But now it took me quite a while to realize that this is a kind of like a structure around the whole thing, and great examples about religion. You know, I'm a Christian, it doesn't matter. It's politics are a great example. You know, we even had a tease today on a couple of text exchanges, and you know, just trying to keep ourselves focused and pointing in the same direction is so important. And the more I get into this program, the more I realize that this stuff is absolutely part of the engine that makes it all work. So it's not just a nice to have; it's absolutely critical. Thanks, so pass.
Yeah. Darren, again, a lot of attempts at recovering from any addiction have failed as a result of those fellowships, if you will, or programs or attempts at recovery. They let other things creep in, and it didn't succeed. You know, one of the things that comes to mind is the Washingtonians, which was a group of folks trying to stop drinking. They did a lot of talking, a lot of sharing, and they almost had a solution to it. Then they let other things creep in, like politics and certain feelings about certain things that were going on then today, and it failed. They're not here today. I know I benefited from the fellowship being here when I got here. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know how to stop, and I certainly didn't know how to stay stopped for any period of time. And thank goodness SAA was here. And one of the reasons it was here in my neighborhood was that people were honoring these traditions. And so one of the things I think we could do is to talk about it, discuss it, pass it on, teach this. Because if we don't teach it to the folks who come to our meetings, who's going to teach them, right? If it's not my sponsor, who's going to teach me? So, and we'll get into maybe how we can do that better in a group or a home group and have some ideas. One of the things I love to point out is in the beginning of the long form, it says, it opens up with our SAA experience has taught us. And one of the things I've heard y'all talk about is these are based on experience, not people's opinions, not theories. It's not, they're not philosophizing on what they think is the best way to do this. This is based on their experience of actually people dying, right? Groups failing. And, and so we can learn from their pain, their suffering, those tragedies. That's how we honor the folks who have come before us. And so we always open with that. Our SAA experience has taught us that as we get into these traditions. Let's see, what else? Anything else before we jump into tradition one, folks?
Just quickly, I had a similar reaction to what Bob was sharing earlier. We used to read the Green Book, the basic text over and over. And whenever it got to reading the traditions, the conversations at the meetings were rather dry and no one really had a whole lot of interest. And the more I really got into service work, working in intergroup, and definitely here working on the podcast, is I see where the traditions are needed. A lot of business meetings, a lot of heated arguments are happening. Let's take a look and see what the traditions say. And it's been a wonderful thing to keep us unified. So with that, I will turn it back.
Thanks, Jason.
One of the things to keep in mind for the listener when we're studying and reading about the traditions is that, ask yourself, what is it asking me to give up? What is it asking me to sacrifice? There's usually some aspect of self that these traditions are asking me to put aside for the benefit of the whole, and so these traditions allow so a group of individuals, right, this fellowship of kind of self-centered, spiritually sick sex addicts to come together, to work together, to stay whole, to stay unified. But without these 12 traditions, we don't really know how to do that very well. Just like with the steps, I come here powerless and I want to stop, I want to recover, but I don't know how to do that very well. And so the steps take me from that powerless, seemingly hopeless state to a spiritual awakening via steps 1 through 12. And these traditions take us from that inability to really know how to unify, right, in tradition 1, to this place of spiritual anonymity, right? Totally in this humble place, this humble spirit of complete unity. And it doesn't matter what I want anymore, right? And those traditions allow those individuals in these groups to do that. And so there kind of is a method to the madness. There's a logical order and progression to it. It's to get from no unity to complete spiritual anonymity. All right, let's dive into it. Tradition 1. And what we'll do is we'll read the short form followed by the long form. If I can get a volunteer to read that, and then we'll dissect it and jump around into the books, see what the authors are telling us here. Can I get a volunteer to read?
Sure. Todd G., recovering addict, happy to read. The 12 Traditions, short form. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA, or for our purposes, SAA unity. And the long form, our SAA experience has taught us that, number 1, each member of Sex Addicts Anonymous is but one small part of a great whole. SAA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward.
Thanks, Todd. All right. I don't know about you, but kind of the one thing that jumps out at me is that word unity in the short form. Maybe we could spend a few minutes here talking about what are we talking about? What do we unify behind? What is this unity piece? Any thoughts on that?
Hi, Bob D, recovering addict. So our common unity is, we come in here, we don't care what people have got, how long they've been in it, what they've been doing. We just want to help the man who's sick, who wants to get sober. So that's it, overwhelmingly above everything else. It's the north that we all point to. So, and I think of examples of that where we might get someone coming into a meeting and it might be appropriate for them to spend, 10 or 15 minutes releasing all the crap that's going on with them. And we will carefully manage that for the greater good and say, okay, we got it. We'll take that outside the meeting. We'll speak with your sponsor. We'll have another session. We don't focus around an individual. And maybe a bad example, but we're just trying to get the most help for everyone here by following the structure that we have. Thanks, I'll pass.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, this is Scott R. I'll just add a comment. I love what the big book has to say on page 17, second paragraph, I guess, in the chapter, There's a Solution. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that now we have discovered a common solution. And so to me, that's when I think about unity, I think of that page 17, a common problem or a common peril, as it says, and a common solution. And that solution sits in the 12 steps. And, you look at the Green Book, and the Green Book echoes that too. When they talk about their take on unity, it says on 78, we're having a hard time and want to act out. We need to be able to pick up the telephone and call someone in the fellowship who understands. We can't recover alone. Instead, we find the freedom we seek as interrelated parts of a greater whole, right? And so that unity is what binds us together, and in particular, the unity of that solution, and allows us to support each other in recovery.
What's the solution? What's the common solution?
12 steps.
Right.
12
Getting a
steps.
sponsor, working the steps, having a spiritual awakening, and carrying the message.
That's all we got, right? We got one set of steps. We got one solution. We got, one problem, one solution. There's the unity behind that. Absolutely.
Before we get to the end of that, I'm also struck by the short form in that it immediately, in a very succinct way, lets us know that, yes, we're acknowledging we're here for personal recovery. However, personal recovery is dependent upon having a group to go to, having a phone to pick up, to call a guy. So these are really inseparable, right? So it's the reason that there was a room for me to walk into because somebody's ego didn't run away with this program and it became, Fred's recovery group, and they did crazy things and spent a lot of money on things they shouldn't spend money on. No, it tells me right from the very first tradition, you and the group are together for the answer to obtain my sobriety and then to help another guy obtain his. I think it's beautiful and so simple and clear that you just can't separate one from the other.
My name's Jim. I'm a sex addict. Darren, I'd like to make a comment that comes out of the 12 and 12, the fifth paragraph. It's a short chapter on Tradition 1. It's the fifth paragraph, about 7 lines down from that fifth paragraph, talking about the sex addict. At first, he goes along because he must, but later he discovers a way of life he really wants to live. Moreover, he finds he cannot keep this priceless gift unless he gives it away. Neither he nor anybody else can survive unless he carries the SAA message. And I like the reminder that when I come in, I'm blinded by my blindness. I can't see. I get a sponsor, as it's already been mentioned. I start working the steps and I start gradually having this awakening. And then I discover that this is the thing I've been looking for. What's the thing? Sobriety. This is what I've been looking for my whole life, but I didn't know how to find it. My other comment quickly, guys, is I found the letter that Wilson wrote back in 1947. He wrote this in December of 1947. And the first full paragraph of his letter that was published in the Grapevine, he notes the following. This is Bill Wilson writing. He says, our whole AA program is securely founded on the principle of humility. That is to say, perspective, which implies, among other things, that we relate ourselves rightly to God and to our fellows, that we each see ourselves as we really are. And I love this, a small part of a great whole. Seeing our fellows thus, we shall enjoy group harmony. This is why AA tradition can confidently state our common welfare comes first. I'll pass. Thanks for letting me share, guys.
Thanks, Darren. Here, they open up that chapter on Tradition 1 with the unity of SAA is the most. Again, I'm just replacing the words here. The unity of SAA is the most cherished quality our society has. Our lives and the lives of all who to come depends squarely upon it. Right? We stay whole or SAA dies. Unbelievable. I love on page 131 of the 12 and 12. It says, on anvils of experience, the structure of our society was hammered out. I love that visual of an anvil, hot metal hammer pounding, sparks flying, just noisy chaos. That's what the society was about. And we were fortunate at SAA to come, many, many years later to benefit from all that. We don't have to hammer it out anymore. We got it right in front of us. Let's keep honoring it. This tells us who we're supposed to prioritize or what we're supposed to prioritize. And it's not the individual. Yeah, we all come here as individuals and individuals make up the meeting, but the group comes first. So, we'll talk about that when we talk about kind of common pitfalls and perils of maybe not honoring the traditions. That could be one of them. Let's see what else jumps out at you in the text, guys. Anything else? Yeah, like you said, Jim, it's kind of a short chapter, kind of obvious. We talked about the unity being the common solution. Because I got to tell you, that the common problem, I've never met anybody that's acted out exactly like me. I don't know about you all. We all got slightly different stories, right? So focusing on the problem clearly can't be the unifying piece. Sometimes it can be a little disunifying. Oh, I didn't do that. I'm not that bad. Maybe I'm not a sex addict, right? So there needs to be some carefulness around that sometimes. But we all can focus on that common solution. We're all working the 12 steps.
Eric, recovered sex addict. So, we talk about what's in this text, but also how do we apply this tradition to our group, right? Every group conscious is different. We all make different decisions for the health of our group. Tag McKinney is a men's only meeting. That decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It was something that was brought to the group conscious, and it was determined that for the health of the group, right, we're going to be a men's only meeting. Now, that doesn't mean we're turning women away at the door, right? We make sure that we identify resources and give them avenues of recovery when they come to us. But for the health of our group, we have elected to be a men's only meeting. another instance of applying this tradition to the group is sometimes you'll have group members that are in a bad place and they're lashing out. And as an individual practicing this tradition, I see it as this tradition's telling me, hey, why don't you pull that guy aside and see what might be the root of why he's acting in this manner, and what can you do to help him, rather than allowing this person to affect the entire group. Maybe some one-on-one time is needed to not only help him, but to also help the group. So I think a lot of what we read in these traditions and take from the 12 and 12, which takes a deeper dive on these traditions, we absolutely have to use it to apply it to our own experiences within a group.
Thanks, Eric. What are some of the common pitfalls, right? So what are some of the ways, Eric, you kind of touched on some of this, what are some of the ways that a group might not do such a good job honoring this idea of unity, this idea of putting the group before the individual? How do you practice it, or how do you sometimes fail to practice these principles?
I can say, for one, that I've seen someone that has started a meeting, and therefore it is my meeting and my rules, and I'm going to run it the way I want to rather than what's going to be best for the group. And I've seen a lot of people leave those meetings, and because they weren't healthy and they weren't a place of recovery. And so one individual's thoughts on how the meeting should be run rather than looking at what's going to be best for the group.
Yeah, we'll see more of that in tradition too, Jason. So again, they're all kind of intertied, right? Kind of woven together. Again, none of us are experts here talking about this. We're just sex addicts sharing some experience, hopefully some strength and some hope, reading from some literature. So if you think we're wrong, you got that right. And if your sponsor teaches us something else, your sponsor's right. One of the surefire ways to really destroy unity is to, gossip about other members, gossip about other groups, talk negatively about other people. Certainly, I've always told that Sex Addicts Anonymous is not going to be destroyed by something outside of SAA, right? SAA will be destroyed from the internal members of SAA if we don't honor these traditions. Focusing on the problem, we talked about how that's not the primary piece that we're unified behind.
Yeah.
I can't stay sober with my own problems, right? I know what I did and it sucked. Hearing about your problems, why would hearing about your problems help me, who can't stay sober with my own problems, stay sober, right? And so I need some hope. And so that's, again, focus on the solution. Now there's some hope. Now there's some unity behind that. What are some of the other issues we might run into? Anything jump out?
I think another danger zone, and again, many of these traditions point us in this direction. I've already expressed the view. I went to a different group where we kind of jokingly say, show up and throw up, just go there, explain to everyone all the problems you're in and how woe things are. And frankly, it just didn't work for me. But here's the big thing. And I found myself falling in this trap when I come in. It's like, no, that's no good. What we do is good. It works. Well, actually, no, it works for me. And we've got to be careful that we don't put that down just because it didn't work for me. It works for some people, and that's great. So not being judgmental on that, it's a really easy trap to fall into. And I like to think that all the guys on this call, the sort of people who've been through the program a while, are very conscious of that, and we're trying and reset, stop. Don't trash that person or that group. It works for them, and that's all that matters. What we're doing works for us. And that's a really, pragmatic way we can keep the ship steering in the right direction, I think. Thanks, I'll pass.
Yeah.
Eric M., sex addict. I think a big part of it for me is I need to not let my ego follow me through that door. That's one of my bricks. I like myself too much. And so the book tells me I have to practice a genuine humility. And if I'm practicing humility, then I'm open-minded to the opinions and experiences of others. And if I'm doing that speaks to unity right there, because I am just one of a greater whole. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's just ego is a killer when it comes to practicing the traditions.
Yeah. I'm reminded that we all come to SA pretty spiritually sick, right? I don't know about you. I did, again, focused on self. I'm dying. I've got a problem. I need help. It's all about me. And I've never been to SA before, right? And so I don't know how to participate. I don't know how to share. I don't know how to behave. And so it's up to the members of the group, right? That's as a sober member of the group. Now it's my responsibility to help that newcomer understand how to participate, how to behave, how to share, like where to sit, maybe sometimes how to dress, lots of things. That's what the group members are responsible for, to protect the pack when the sick cat comes in. And so again, we need to teach this, we need to demonstrate this. And if we're not, that's one of the ways we kind of fail this tradition. If I'll figure it out, and let that one individual with some big personalities, a lot of spiritual sickness come in and steamroll over the meeting, when our group conscious said, hey, we're going to do this, and the individual comes in, no, I want to do this. And, well, it's our job. We don't need to tap dance around these folks. We need to say, in a loving, kind, patient way, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, but our group has decided to do this or to not do this. And if you don't agree with that, we can go outside and talk. And that protects the integrity of the group, the integrity of our message. So it's, again, demonstrating and teaching, and the group's responsible for that. All right. In the interest of time, I think we could probably move on to number 2. I think we beat number 1 up pretty good, to kind of summarize that. It looked at what we're prioritizing. We're prioritizing the solution, and we're putting the group ahead of the whole. Tradition 2 is going to kind of focus on authority and what gives us authority. Can I get a volunteer to read the short and long of number 2?
I'll go ahead and read.
Thanks, Scott.
Tradition 2, short form, says, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. And then the long form says, our SAA experience has taught us that for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience.
And so here's where we see one of the slight changes to the SAA version of the step. So in SAA, just like in our steps, we got rid of the he, him references. And so they changed it to a loving God as expressed in our group conscience. Our leaders but trusted servants that do not govern. And we'll look at another change in Tradition 3 when we get there. What's jumping out here, folks? So who's in charge? Am I started the, kind of like Jason was sharing. Hey, I started the group. I'm in charge.
Definitely not, right? I mean, for me, I love it where it talks about a loving God. I mean, I think it's one of the few places, perhaps the only, where you've got an adjective that's describing God, and it's not me, which is a hard lesson that I've had to learn, because I like being in control. When it comes down to the purpose of our group, it's not my opinion that matters, right? It's God as he expresses himself through the group conscience.
Bob D, recovering addict, is one pragmatic example of how this come into practice recently. When we do the foundation, when a new guy comes in, deer in the headlights, we go through the foundation to explain the 3-part progressive disease. It's very powerful. And then on the top of it as God, but we always make a point of saying it's God. It's not the people who run this church, this Baptist church, or whatever we happen to be in. It doesn't matter. It's Christian, Hindu. It's a power greater than yourselves. And that's really important. I get it. As a Christian, I get it. Our group's been growing like topsy, and we had a group recently want to get together and have a Bible study, a Christian Bible study. Great stuff, right? Good. But then the question came in, well, we'd like to use a Zoom for this. And it's like, well, and I was actually one of the people who was before it. And the great thing about the way this all works is no one said, hey, Darren, you're the guy in charge. So what's the deal? Are you okay with that? Actually, I think it did go to Darren initially. But then it was like, well, I don't know. What does everyone think? It kind of doesn't sit well with the God of your understanding. That's a very specific God of the Christian understanding. So what did we do about it? We had a group conscience. I actually wasn't there, but it doesn't matter. They had a group conscience. The discussion was exactly around this. And it's like, okay, is that the right thing to do for an SAA specific meeting? Do everyone need to contribute to this, right? Is that fair? Is that right? And the outcome of the discussion was no, that's not the right use of our resources and funds. And the coolest thing was, it wasn't contentious. The guy who actually made the suggestion, I spoke to him recently. He said, man, that was great. I didn't even look at it like that. And that's how this kind of works, right? So it's not, this is about God, but not about Christian God or Hindu God or anything else that we might believe. And I saw that as a real pragmatic way of actually resolving an issue, which definitely would, if we'd have made the other decision, was at risk of going in the wrong direction and making this, a pseudo-religious thing, which it's not. So anyway, that's I thought that was a very pragmatic way this worked in practice.
Eric, recovered sex addict. I like this tradition because the short form is actually longer than the long form. And the piece of this that it adds is that our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern, right? So we like to pride ourselves on being very decentralized and disorganized. And that's a good thing, right? Because it doesn't allow one person to bowl over everybody else. But the thing I see here is it still talks about leaders, right? There are still leaders that need to step up and lead the group, but they're leaders that are chosen by the group, right? They're not dictators. And we all have the ability to become a leader in the group. We all share in that responsibility, but no one person is governing. Right? We have group consciences. We have a group conscience at least once a month to deal with the business of running a group, to deal with any sort of issues that may arise that need input, right? To what Bob was alluding, the decision wasn't made in a vacuum. Everybody had the opportunity to weigh in on it. And ultimately, it was the group that decided the direction we were going to go. And no one person has the ability to lead us down a path of no return. We'll either avoid that as a group or we'll go that direction as a group. Either way, we're sticking together with unity.
Thanks, Eric. Darren here. I'm going to throw out a question to the group here. How do individual members of SAA get connected spiritually, get connected to God of their understanding?
That's a great question, Darren. Obviously, what the steps do, step one allows me to see the problem. And then in step two, I find this power of God of my own understanding, not my sponsors, not my grand sponsors, not my moms, not my dads, of my understanding. And that starts that process. I need to work all 12 steps to remove the blocks and to find and maintain a relationship with God. But it actually starts in two, where I see the solution is God. And I love how Tradition 2 refers us back to that power that I begin to find by doing the work. The authors in the big book on 46 tell me that I don't need to consider another's conception of God. My own conception, however inadequate, is sufficient enough to make a contact with him. And as I continue working the steps and do the work in 4 through 9 to identify the blocks in 4 and then have them removed in 9, that's blocking me off from that power. Then I can be, if I have this conscious contact with God, then, and I'm part of the group conscious, and I am, if I'm a member, then I can allow that power that's over me to help influence the proper direction and decisions that the group need to make, as long as it's in the best interest of the group.
So it sounds like God gets disclosed through the members of the group, huh? Who ideally should be meeting frequently, to ideally let God disclose him or herself, right? They took out the word may, in the original version it says as God may disclose. In SAA it says as, what does it say? As a loving God as expressed in our group conscious. But sometimes the groups don't get it right? Sometimes we might make a decision and it wasn't the right decision, and we realize that later on through something. And so we don't always get God's will. We're just trying to do our best. And I I think we have permission to make mistakes, fortunately. We're just going to do our best. But ideally, a healthy group will have frequent group conscious meetings. The members of the group, the majority of the members are going to be spiritually awoken as a result, as Jim said, of the steps. Because again, if I'm brand new and I've never been to a group conscious meeting, if I don't have a sponsor, if I haven't worked the steps, I'm pretty blocked from whatever this power is, right? If I wasn't blocked, why am I in Sex Addicts Anonymous? Right? I'm good, right? I come here to get unblocked. Let's see what else. So, we talked in the beginning about what am I sometimes I have to sacrifice something. And this tradition, I think, is telling sometimes I need to sacrifice what I want, the decision that I want. I wanted it to be a mixed meeting, and it was for a long, long time. To bring up a previous example, years later, groups change, things change, and a group conscious was brought up, and and I said no. It stayed mixed, and fortunately, Darren's not in charge, right? I don't want that kind of pressure. I don't need that kind of pressure. My ego doesn't need that. And the group conscious overruled my thought and other thoughts, right? I don't know what the vote was on that particular topic, but that's what God does, right? We bring it to the group, and the group decides. It's really neat how it works.
Yeah, I was thinking about how at my home meeting we have a chance for the intergroup rep to make announcements. And at one of my other meetings, we were doing a business meeting, and I suggested that we have a spot at the end of the meeting for the intergroup rep to make announcements. And I thought, it works really well in my home group. I think it would work really well in this group. And the group thought that was coalescing too much power around the intergroup rep. And so it was my business proposal. I was the intergroup rep at that meeting. And the collective group said, no, we have a chance to make general SAA announcements, and you can do your announcements as the intergroup rep there. So I had to let my ego go with the power of the group. And there are several other things that I can name that I've seen that have happened that I think that it's in the best interest that we do this. And sometimes the rest of the group all coalesces around the same idea. Other times I think it's in the best interest of this group, and everyone says absolutely not. So I love that it takes the ego out of it and allows the group to make the right decision or make the mistake, and then maybe make a course correction at a later time. So I've seen it happen a number of times.
Yeah. When we talk about common pitfalls, we'll talk about, bleeding deacons and what's the other word? Elder statesmen, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind is, again, when we talk about group conscious here and voting and raising hands, does everybody get a vote? Does, are there requirements to vote? How do you all manage that? Because it might be a controversial thing. If I'm sitting in a group conscious, I get a vote. What are your thoughts?
That's a really good question. And I see it real simple, guys. As a guy who's acted out for 40 years, and till I got over myself in step one, I was screwed. So I'm sober today. Hopefully I'm going to be sober tomorrow, but I'm no different than anybody else in our group. So, the guy, I saw a post the other day, one of the young men on there said, I've been 14 days sober. It's like, great. Yeah, well, I'm sober today too. So I think everyone gets an equal say. I don't think it matters at all. Actually, if you're senior or how many years sobriety you've got, if they're there and they're willing and they attain that, they get a say. That's it.
Anybody else?
I think it needs to be my home group. If I'm in a group conscience meeting and say I'm visiting that group, it needs to be my home group for me to vote. It doesn't matter if I'm one day sober, no days sober. If I'm a member, the only requirement, and I know we're coming to that, so I don't want to spill the beans, but if I'm a member of that group, I'm able to vote. If I'm not a member, I've seen in some instances where non-members are not allowed to vote, but I'm sure it depends upon each group conscience. But in our group, I need to be a member to cast a vote.
Just thinking about the group conscience, there is, this came up at a business meeting. What does that exactly mean? Is it a majority vote? Is it a unanimous decision? And there is no clear-cut path. And there have been some controversial things that have been brought up at business meetings, and it was like a 51 to 49%. And that to me was not a clear group conscience. And so I said, even though the majority of that passed, I don't think that it's enough for us as a collective to move forward with this until we discuss it a little bit more. And the next time it came up for a vote, it was like 80-20, because we kind of narrowed out the things that were sticking points for some people. So a slim majority doesn't necessarily mean the group conscience. I see so many different ways that we can arrive at the same thing.
I'll add a comment here. From my perspective, I agree. And it needs to be your home group, but we're in a group conscience. We're trying to seek, God's will as He may express it in the group. And I know when I came in, my problem was I was blocked. Right, I was blocked from my higher power, and that block was not removed until I worked the steps and I had that spiritual experience. So, to me, I would say that, I think the people voting should have had worked the steps and have had a spiritual experience. Otherwise, I'm not sure they can really discern the will of God properly for the group.
Yeah, real quick, Eric, sex addict, Jason, what you were saying actually reminded me of the old cartoon, How Does a Bill Become a Law?
Oh, right? Yeah.
And, it got me thinking. I've been told that when I have an idea, I should talk to my sponsor. And when I have a really good idea, I should go have coffee with my sponsor, right? So when we're in a group conscious, if one of my sponsees is, maybe he's being contrary just to be contrary, I might pull him aside after the meeting and say, "Hey, bud, what's going on here? What's your motivation for supporting this side of things?" Because again, what we're trying to do is all come to some sort of consensus. And as you were mentioning, Jason, a lot of times that means further discussion. Sometimes decisions aren't made the same day a topic is brought up. I know that we've had certain topics that we decide on something, and then a couple of months later we revisit it, because just like with the tradition, sometimes our first decision isn't the best decision, and a lot of it's trial and error. And I think having all the members of the group weigh in on those decisions allows us to course correct in the future.
Darren here, a great group conscious will have the majority of its members attend the group conscious. Again, that's one of the pitfalls we'll talk about, is not many people show up. So everyone has a right to be there, right? Everyone's a member. If you want to call yourself a sex addict, you're welcome to come sit in a chair in any meeting around the world. But sometimes home groups will have other requirements in terms of voting in a group conscious, and we want to hear from everybody. Hey, what's your opinion? You've never been here before. You're brand new. You don't have a sponsor. You haven't worked the steps. If you have a thought, let's hear it. But when it comes time to vote, it might not be that person, they've never been to a group conscious before, so that might be a nice requirement. Hey, you've at least been to one group conscious meeting, so you know what it's like. Another common requirement might be that you at least have a sponsor, that you call it your home group, that you show up to your home group, that you give $2 a meeting to your home group, that you have talked about the traditions. A lot of group conscious issues are minimized by understanding the traditions. And if I've never read them or even know what they mean, but here I am expressing my opinion, it might not be the strongest thing, right, or the smartest thing. It might not be God directed, but more of someone's personal experience outside of our fellowship's experience or opinion. So some of those things are probably great ideas to incorporate into a group conscious, because otherwise any number of people can come to a meeting and go, hey, we're going to change this to this because we don't like this. And all of a sudden they've never been there. Now they changed the format of the meeting, for example. You could get into some stuff like that, but if you have kind of some ground rules, it's going to minimize the chance of that happening. I'm not saying that's a very common experience, but it could. All right. Well, in the interest of time, we should probably move on to just kind of look at some of the common pitfalls here, right? So what are some of the ways that we can dishonor this tradition, if you will? One of them is not having frequent group conscious meetings, right? Just not meeting at all, and letting the person who formed the meeting run the meeting forever. Anyone ever been to one of those meetings where the guy who runs the meeting is not there, so you can't have a meeting? Right? How sad is that? That's happened. That happens more than I think I want to admit. Oh, I'm sorry, Darren's not here. We don't know what to do. Well, how long have you been meeting? 10 years? Oh, okay. Probably not the healthiest situation. It's probably not God running that meeting. All right, what else?
Most of our meetings have written into our meeting script that we meet on the first whatever day it is of the month or the last day of the month. So it is there set in stone that this will have a regular business meeting after the end. Some of my meetings will have the business meeting within the actual meeting so more people can attend. But having regular group conscience or business meetings is a definite plus. I have seen or have heard tale of a few of my friends that have been at meetings where they don't do regular service rotations and they don't have regular business meetings. And so trying to get something changed that isn't working never gets brought up.
Right. And the good thing is, ideally, no one has the authority to not allow a group conscience to be called. Anyone could call it. And how cool is that? I love the idea of, right, trick them into attending a group conscious by replacing the normal meeting with the group conscious meeting. We lock the door of my home group. We don't let them out. Might be a fire hazard, but that's all right. What else? See, I've wrote some things down here. Giving group members ample time to bring the issue to God, right? Meditate on it, pray about it, right? Like we don't have to vote on it right now. Let's table it. Let's bring it back next month. Not sharing decisions with other members, not being an example of attending, right? Not sharing what the decisions are with other members who weren't there, right? Not taking minutes, not sharing the minutes. Decision tree. How cool would the decision tree be? So you can see the history of the group's decision over the time that the group's been around. That's kind of nice to see the history. Giving one person too much authority, leaning too heavily on the old timer's opinion per se, right? Where is it in the 12 and 12 that talks about bleeding deacons, right? And that's the page 135. The guy that's been around the longest, constantly connives for re-election to office, who continues to be consumed with self-pity. They think they're right. Their ideas are the right kind. They've been around, so I'm just gonna defer to what they say. That's not the characteristics of the trusted servant that I think these traditions are talking about.
Darren, I think a big part of a healthy group conscience is just like the program. It's got to be something that people are attracted to go to, right? So specifically, I've been part of group consciences that could drag on for 2 hours, right? So it's important to have somebody there to facilitate it, to make sure that, we have adequate time to talk about something. But at this point, we're going to stop and we're going to hold a vote and then we're going to move on to the next topic because we've only got an hour for this group conscience meeting, right? Guys give their time to this group and for some guys, they're like, oh man, another meeting after the meeting. I don't want to participate in that. But if there is something to not necessarily incentivize them, but to make them feel like they're heard, they're part of the group, and that their input is part of what makes this group as healthy as it is, that's what makes me go to a group conscious. The fact that we all want to be able to affect change somewhere. And the fact that I get to do it with, 50 of my closest friends makes it worth it for me.
Yeah. Some characteristics of maybe a healthy leader in the 12 and 12, it talks about the elder statesman, right? The quiet opinion, the sure knowledge, the humble example, having a sense of humor, is great. sense of humor, having cooling off periods, having some patience. It's okay to call timeout in a heated discussion. Hey, let's all get quiet for 2 minutes. Talk to God, right? We'll come back and discuss this heated topic. That's okay. Anybody can call timeout. Willingness to listen, willingness to wait, fairness. Again, trust in this power, this loving power greater than us, who's running the whole show. All right. How about we move on to tradition 3? You all ready for that? Let's start and have some fun for the next 10 minutes. Who wants to read the short and the long?
I've got it, Darren. Short form, page 562. The only requirement for SAA membership is a desire to stop acting out. And the long form, our SAA experience has taught us that our membership ought to include all who suffer from sex addiction. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover, nor ought SAA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 sex addicts gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an SAA group, provided that as a group, they have no other affiliation.
Thanks, Jim. There's a lot of stuff in that long form that's missing from the short form, right? That's found in SAA. So I see this one as this tradition really talks about who an SAA member is and what an SAA group is. So let's discuss. Notice that again, SAA had to change this one, right? Obviously from the drinking fellowship, they said you just have to have a desire to stop drinking. Here they say you have to have a desire to stop addictive sexual behavior, which kind of implies a little bit more than just a desire to stop acting out, right? Our language is addictive sexual behavior in this tradition, and so it kind of implies that it meets a certain kind of quality of behavior, right? Once I start, I can't control how much I use, and when I make up my mind to stop, I can't stay stopped on my own power, as opposed to someone who might be just a moderate or hard user of selfish sex. But anyway, probably more we need to get into for this conversation. So who's going to tell someone they're a sex addict or not? Is it going to be you, Jim? Jason?
No.
Person comes in the room. Nah, you're not.
Yeah, I've heard so many times, I don't know if I'm a sex addict and I'm not sure if I belong here. And the one thing that we always say, do you think you need to be here?
Why do you think you need to be here? Right?
Yeah.
Most people don't come into SA accidentally, right? Because they're having just one bad weekend. Usually there's a series of decades or months or years, certainly, behind it.
One of the things our home group does, Taking Action Group in McKinney, Texas, is we do a foundation and we explain the disease, the powerlessness physically and mentally, and the spiritual malady overriding those two components. And we let the newcomer decide for himself many, many times, not 100% of the time, but many, many times after they see the foundation, they have a pretty good feel for whether or not they're one of us. And we always tell them, hey, please come back. If you're not sure, keep coming back. There's zero pressure for you to join the group. And again, only the person, the addict himself or the non-addict himself, can make that declaration. No one else, my sponsor, my mom, my wife, my therapist, no one can call me as a sex addict but myself. And I like that freedom. And then once we know he's a sex addict or she in some groups, we have a treatment plan for that. And it's called the 12 Steps of Sex Addicts Anonymous. And we align them with the sponsor and we get them going right away in the book and in the steps.
Thanks, Jim.
I'm just grateful that the bar for membership is so low. It doesn't require a large monetary advance. It doesn't require a certain IQ. It doesn't require a certain height. It's the only requirement. And for me, that just allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief and really focus on what I was hearing. And the group I attended for the very first meeting, the Power Lunch group of Dallas, did the foundation as well. And, quite honestly, it was enough to put on 10,000-pound Nikes and walk into that meeting. I certainly didn't need another requirement because I had told myself that this was something I could beat for 30 years. So this tradition, I think, really helps us focus on the guy that's still suffering and make sure, like the rest of the book and the steps, there's a very low bar for him to look at the foundation and decide for himself whether or not he belongs.
I know a lot of us we don't come through that door by choice. A lot of times it's either a spouse that has made a threat. If you don't go to this meeting, then it's over, or it's a legal situation that's driven you through the door. Most guys don't come willingly through that door. And one of the things that our group has been mentioned multiple times is that we do that foundation. But we also urge new guys to get a temporary sponsor before they walk out the door, right? Because really, step one is where it happens, where you make that decision on if you're a sex addict or not. So it's imperative to get started quickly, because if you discover that, hey, and you're not a sex addict, that maybe you don't need to come to these meetings. Look, there's probably something better you can be doing with your Thursday evening or Saturday morning. But if you do think that you're a sex addict, well, there are 11 other steps that we're more than willing to walk you through and show you how we recovered. But it's so important to self-qualify, because if I don't meet the requirement that is a desire to stop, then all I'm doing is filling the chair. We're not going to reject you. We're not going to tell you, oh, you can't be here if you just want to fill the chair. But if I have a choice as a sponsor between sponsoring somebody that's dying and sponsoring somebody that's just filling a chair, I'm going to choose the guy that's dying, because he's the one that ultimately needs the 12-step work.
Thanks, Eric. In the interest of time, we'll probably wrap it up here, and we'll start next time maybe with finishing up Tradition 3, kind of to wet our whistle for the next conversation. What is, another Green Book says the desire to stop is subjective, right? No one can really judge my desire. But practically speaking, we demonstrate a certain amount of desire to get well by doing certain things in SAA, right? We take certain actions, which expresses our willingness to stop. And then we can look at, it says a group can call themselves a group, provided they have no other affiliation, but they meet for the purpose of recovery, right? So what does the purpose of recovery look like? What does that sound like? What does that look like in a group setting? Because again, that can differentiate healthy groups from maybe groups that are really struggling. So next time we could look at that and talk about some of the common pitfalls here with this third tradition.
Yeah, some of the other things that I was going to bring up that we don't have the time to really get into in this episode, but looking at when certain people feel that maybe that guy doesn't belong here in this meeting. He's got an opinion, or he acts in a certain way that makes me uncomfortable. We look at, I always pinpoint them to Tradition 3. The only requirement for being here is the desire. And that can bring up a whole range of other things. And I do want to discuss that in more detail. But I don't think we can really cover that one for tonight.
Well, I look forward to next time, Jason.
Well, I am loving this, and I am really eager to keep moving on with this series, talking about the traditions. I think it is really important. It'll be eye-opening for a lot of people who, like myself, in the beginning, when reading the traditions, just kind of rolled my eyes and say, okay, I see it, but when can we talk about my problems? So anyway, I am grateful for all of you here today, and look forward to continuing this in the future.
Thanks, Jason. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Stay sober.
Have a good night, guys.
I'm so glad that we got to do this recording. Many thanks to our guest panel and to Darren for leading this discussion. Since this episode had both the traditions history and the first three traditions, we had a lot to talk about. And like we mentioned, we couldn't fully talk about the third tradition, so we'll start there on the next episode that we do in this series. And hopefully we'll be able to complete traditions 4, 5, and 6. And I am definitely looking forward to the next one. And so now turning over to feedback over the last few months, we've gotten a few emails, a lot of comments on the YouTube channel, and another review on Apple Podcasts. So turning to the emails, I got this one from someone in the UK. And again, I will be abbreviating any names. Hi, I'm M from the UK, Northeast, and I've been listening to your podcast for a few months now, as I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. I'm in counseling and only recently addressed my sex and alcohol addiction. I attend AA, but there are no SAA meetings in towns near to me. I would firstly like to say thanks for the podcast, as it is helping me to identify with the addiction and also be able to open up and no longer feel ashamed about sex. I was sexualized from the age of 8 and had always believed it was wrong or it was something bad. This has been carried into adulthood, where I've turned to sex as an escape or as a way of not having to address or connect to things. I wanted to message, as I don't really have people in the AA fellowship who can identify with sex addiction, and sex addiction isn't a widely addressed subject in my area of the country. I just want to be able to connect with someone on the same level with this as AA. Hope this is okay. Many thanks, M. And yeah, I will get to reply to this. This came in at the beginning of January. And yeah, I will send links to the UK website where they have lots of information about meetings in the UK, and not all of them are in person, so there are some Zoom meetings that are available where you can connect with other sex addicts, and especially in your time zone. A lot of the meetings out here in the US, here on the West Coast, there's an 8-hour time difference, so that can make a difference. And this next one I just got in a few days ago and said, "Hey Jason, I've listened to one of your recent podcasts and was surprised to hear you say that you hadn't received any emails. I assumed you were usually flooded with emails." And I'm going to stop there. Yeah, we get occasional emails, but definitely not flooded. Back to the email. Anyways, I have some random musings to share. I think it would be neat to have a podcast about SA versus SAA versus SLAA. I'm curious as to how each had started. I've always thought it a bit ironic that in 12-step groups, the tradition, i.e. rule, is to not talk about outside groups. I get the rationale of not diverting from the group's respective message. I think it's a bit silly because of how similar the three groups' messages are. It also seems a bit contradictory that in each of the S groups, the AA Big Book is always approved material, but the other S groups' literature is just too darn different. I get it that it's because they are all derived from AA. The final irony is that in all 12 steps we practice rigorous honesty, but we're too scared to mention another 12-step group, at least in my local meeting. I feel like Harry Potter when he finally tells everyone, "Let's just effing say Voldemort," rather than "he who should not be named." I think my main point is that I find pros and cons from different resources, and it's not solely dependent on what type of S group it is. The podcast idea here is tips to finding meetings that work. Thank you very much for your service with making your podcast. If you ever need somebody to go on your podcast, I'd be happy to do so. Signed, A. And yeah, this is one of the first things that I thought about for doing a podcast episode about, and haven't really found a way to do that. Hearing your email, I know that on a few recent episodes we had Unchatwa talk about his starting in Sexaholics Anonymous, which is SA. We also had Hayden talking about her start in SLAA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. If we do something like this, I really would like a panel of people who have been to the different fellowships. I myself only go to SAA. I think it would be a real cool topic to talk about, but again, I do want to have experts or people who have had experience in those fellowships. Yeah, and I do agree about the Harry Potter bit. Turning now over to the YouTube comments. And some of these date back from a few months ago, and I don't know if I've read them here on the podcast, so I just wanted to highlight the last maybe 10 or so comments that have come in. And this first one here is from the Joe and Charlie Step 4 Part 1. Higher power keeps showing me things just when I need it. Thanks, Jason. And you're very welcome. Another one thanking us for the info on the 3 circles, and that was on episode 4 about the 3 circles. And a couple comments on episode 64, which was with my friend Juan. And I may have read this one on the podcast a while ago, but I'm not sure. Even there are not a lot of likes, I was looking for this. Thanks, man. Let's keep it up. There are a lot of people out there looking for this. And another comment on that. Thanks, Juan. We struggle, then we break through. Porn is not good for us under any circumstances. It may drive us into fear, obsession, but then we change our thoughts together. And thanks for the comment there. Going to episode 57, and this is John R. talking at the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. Here's one that says, hearing LGBTQ plus stories are wonderful. And another one on that same episode that just came in a few days ago. And it says, I didn't find a meeting, so I tried this for my 7th meeting out of 90. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you're missing a meeting, a lot of these episodes do work well as a substitute. So we do have a lot more out there. Thank you for those comments. Got one on episode 8, which was using program tools to help us with life's difficulties. You are doing God's work. Thank you. And that was a month ago. And you're very welcome. Another one from Ange's episode, which was number 78. And this comes from a former guest on the podcast. And he says, wow, just wow. Yeah, I definitely agree. And finally, this one was on my episode, which was episode number 3. It says, hello, Jason. I relate to your struggles so much. I'm desperate for recovery, but there are no SAA meetings where I live. Could you somehow help me? And this came in last week while I was sick, and I will definitely respond to that. But yeah, a lot of great comments there. And thank you for everyone that listens on YouTube and comments. I also wanted to mention a review that we just got on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. And this came in this week. And it says, made a mess of my life, but this podcast has been helping me see, learn, and understand. Please keep it coming. Yep, definitely will. And I believe that catches us up on all of those. And I haven't mentioned it in a while, but yeah, on Apple Podcasts, if you can rate the podcast, add any comments, that really helps get the podcast visible for other people to find it. So in the last couple minutes here of this episode, I wanted to mention that a friend of mine from the Noon Groups sent me a link to a song. So yeah, he was listening to episode 73, and that was with Hayden. And I asked any listeners to share some music about recovery that really relates to them to share here on the podcast. And he sent me a song by Tyler Joe Miller, and the song is called Fighting. He mentioned that the lyrics are spot on for him in his journey of recovery.
I'm still fighting with the demons up inside my head, and I ain't lying. There's some dark ones underneath my bed. There's a long road in front of me. There's a light I finally see. I'm done hiding. Still ain't the man I wanna be, but I'm still fighting. And I'm still fighting.
Yeah, so I really relate to this, and I love the line, I'm still fighting with the demons up inside my head. And that relates to another song that I would like to share here that I just found last week or the week before. The song came out in December, so it's barely a month old. And this is from an artist named Ren. And the song is called Hi, Ren. Ren, I believe he's from Wales. He's a guitarist, a singer, a rapper, spoken word artist. And this song is a conversation, a battle between voices in his head. I look at it as the negative self-talk, the addict brain versus the sane just listening to this battle back and forth, it really reminds me, I'm a Tolkien geek. So, thinking of Lord of the Rings, the arguments between Gollum and Smeagol is the same character, but two very opposite viewpoints. And in at least the movie, seeing Andy Serkis's performance, where he's pointing his head one way, speaking as one voice, and points his head the other way, speaking as another voice. And in this video, Ren does the same exact thing. This song has gone viral on YouTube, and I was doubtful when I first started listening to it, and after just a few seconds in, I was just like, oh my God. So anyway, here's a bit of that song.
Hi there, Ren. It's been a little while. Did you miss me? You thought you buried me, didn't you? Risky. Cause I always come back. Deep down, you know that. Deep down, you know I'm always in periphery. Ren, on your pleased to see me. It's been weeks since we spoke, bro. I know you need me. You're the sheep, I'm the shepherd. Not your place to lead me. Not your place to be biting off the hand that feeds me. Hi, Ren. I've been taking some time to be distant. I've been taking some time to be still. I've been taking some time to be by myself since my therapist told me I'm ill. And I've been making some progress lately, and I've learned some new coping skills. So I haven't really needed you much, man. I think we need to just step back and chill. Ren, you sound more insane than I do. You think that those doctors are really there to guide you? Been through this a million times. Your civilian mind is so perfect at always being lied to. Okay, take another pill, boy. Drown yourself in the sound of white noise. Follow this 10-step program, rejoice. All your problems will be gone. Fucking dumb boy. Nah, mate. This time is different, man, trust me. I feel like things might be falling in place, and my music's been kinda doing bits too. Like I actually might do something great. And when I'm gone, maybe I'll be remembered for doing something special with myself. That's why I don't think that we should talk, man. Cause when you're with me, it never seems to help. You think that you can amputate me? I am you, you are me, you are I am we are one. Split in two, that makes one, so you see. You gotta kill you if you wanna kill me. I'm not leftover dinner, I'm not scraps on the side. Oh, your music is thriving, delusional guy. Where's your top 10 hit? Where's your interview with Oprah? Wow, you're
Yeah. There's so much more to this. It's, I think, an 8-minute piece, and the very end is a spoken word part. Every time I listen to it, it makes me tear up. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. Next week, I will be talking about the Bay Area Retreat, which we are actually doing for the first time in 4 years in person. And I'm hoping to have a few people from the Bay Area talk about the retreat. We're basically trying to get the word out to all of the groups around the Bay Area in Northern California, but we thought the podcast would be a great way to talk about the retreat as well. So I look forward to that. It was nice to get some emails in at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you have any feedback for the podcast, anything that you would like to share with the greater podcast community, any songs of recovery. Just thinking about songs of recovery, I forgot to mention that my friend who sent me the song Fighting wanted to do a panel podcast discussion on music and recovery. And that, I think, is long overdue. So I'm trying to find all the right people for that. And if you're interested, please let me know. And you can email me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com to be part of that. With all that said, I thank you so much for listening. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.